Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the esteemed Kyle Peterson and the esteemed Kim Strassel. Good to have you both with us. We're going to turn now to the Devon Archer transcript testimony. He testified on Monday, Hunter Biden's former business partner, to the House Oversight Committee. The members of Congress came out and characterized that transcript after the hearing, but they didn't release the transcript itself until Thursday morning. Kim, what did we learn from the transcript?
Well, I think the most important thing we learned is it essentially confirmed that Hunter Biden was leveraging the family brand, in particular when it came to Ukraine and his board gig with Burisma. Archer essentially confirmed that that post that Hunter got was entirely because of the family brand. It existed to open doors for Burisma back in Washington, D.C. He actually, at one point in the transcript, said that he thought Burisma would have gone out of business if it didn't have that brand attached to it. Because remember the context here, it was under investigation by a Ukrainian prosecutor. And so importantly, I think what this transcript does, which is really quite astounding, is it also ties Joe Biden with this in terms of being on speakerphone calls. And I think it really underlines the extent to which Joe understood that Hunter was leveraging all of this. And it's quite shocking given that he'd been sent on this important and vital diplomatic mission to deal with Ukraine and created a situation in which Burisma executives clearly believed that the Biden name was for sale and by extension, the U.S. government. And that's just an awful thing. And it's kind of a form of its own political corruption, whether or not Joe Biden never took a dime.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just let's think back here, Kyle, to the context of 2014. Russia has stolen Crimea. It has moved into eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is beleaguered. It's in the middle of an election campaign. Joe Biden, designated by Barack Obama. You are the point man, Joe. You're the guy who's going to deal with Ukraine. Highly sensitive, important mission. Diplomatically, the U.S. wants to protect Ukraine and make sure that it is pursuing a democratic election and stays allied with the West to the extent that it could be. And yet he muddies all this up by bringing his son into, in his business relations, his brother, the lobbyist, doing business with Ukraine, also clearly comes through in some of the transcript. And you can imagine, what are the Ukrainians thinking here? Are they thinking, Joe Biden is an honest broker? Why is his son around? And Burisma's thinking, I guess if we pay Hunter, put him on the board, if Joe's got clout with Obama, he's the vice president, very good for us because we could get things done in D.C., particularly try to get this prosecutor fired. Joe helped him get that prosecutor fired. I think the only word for this is sleazy.
Yeah, and Hunter clearly tried to give the impression that he was influential with his father. So, for example, there's an email in advance of Vice President Biden's visit to Ukraine where Hunter apparently says, my guy's upcoming travels should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking, but what he will say and do is out of our hands. Then there's all these instances where he's meeting with business partners and his dad ends up on the phone, on the speakerphone. And Archer does say that he spoke to his dad basically every day in that period of his life. But it is fascinating. There's this exchange where the questioners are saying, well, isn't that weird if you're in a business meeting? Like, if I called my dad right now, wouldn't you find that strange? And he says, yeah, that would be a little bit odd. But the intent, obviously, is to give the impression that he can pull strings on behalf of these companies. And to Kim's point, I think this raises a lot of new questions that need to be asked. And I agree that even if there is not evidence ultimately that President Biden was getting in on any of these payments, it does raise the question about, is that really the proper role of the vice president to let his office and his name be used that way by his son? And how did he not know about it if he didn't? Or if he did, then why did he let it go on?
The Archer testimony clearly shows that Joe did know what was going on. He clearly did. I mean, he may not have As you say, we don't have evidence that he actually cashed any checks himself for it, but he clearly knew it was going into the family coffers, if you will. And it's extraordinary. Imagine, just to play an alternative here, that was often suggested as something that was happening during the Trump administration, but there was no evidence that it did. Imagine while Donald Trump negotiating the Abraham Accords, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, going over there and saying to Saudi businessmen, how about putting Ivanka on the board of the Aramco, the Saudi oil company? We could use the money. And, you'll have a friend in Washington. I mean, it would have been outrageous and denounced far and wide, Kim, but that's essentially kind of what happened here with Joe. He's fulfilling a public duty on behalf of the President of the United States with strategic interests of the United States at play. And he's also at the same time implicitly supporting the family business.
Right. I mean, and this was also icky. Let's not forget that employees at the State Department flagged it. They blew the whistle on it. They had issues with it and brought it up. And yet, so far as we know, no action was ever taken to shut it down or stop it, at least not from the vice president's side. And Joe Biden was very lucky that 2020, nobody in the press wanted to cover this. There was a concerted effort to deep six it all, even though there was, actual documents that showed the concern here. There was also Hunter Biden's laptop, which was, of course, suggested it was disinformation. So now all of this is coming out, and Joe Biden has announced he's going to run for re-election, and he's going to have to explain it this time. It's impossible to ignore. It's a new chain around his neck.
Yeah, I think because of the point you made about 2020 and because of the charges against Trump's not going to let this go. Republicans aren't going to let this go. And this will be a liability of Joe Biden in the campaign, just based on what we know now. We also don't know what else the investigators in the House will discover. And there's nobody, Kyle, who's better at just driving a prosecution, a political prosecution. This is not a criminal one, but a political prosecution of an issue like this than Donald Trump. And his goal in the election, and this is a warning to Democrats, is going to be to essentially neutralize Trump's own vulnerabilities with the various indictments and say, basically tell voters, there's no difference between the two, much as he did in 2016 against Hillary Clinton and the accusations about Trump's terrible treatment of women by bringing Hillary's husband, Bill Clinton, and his treatment of women center stage.
But this Ukraine stuff has also gotten to the point where I think, you're right that Trump will not let this go. But I think even there will be some interest by mainstream reporters. Because remember what President Biden said in 2020 when he was running on the debate stage was things like, my son did nothing wrong. Now we have a plea deal on tax charges and gun crimes. And we have all this information new about what he was actually doing in Ukraine on the board of this Ukrainian energy company. And so I think he will not be able to dodge that question even when he is on friendly territory. How are you going to explain what you told the American public in 2020? And why were you letting your son put you on speakerphone and saying hi to his business partners while you were vice president of the United States? And to Kim's point, there was flags raised in the State Department about this. Some of the reporting in 2019 said that the Biden's office told people complaining about this that he didn't have the bandwidth to deal with that issue. But no doubt Republicans in the House are not going to let this go either. And they may go find some of those people working in the Biden office and ask them, why not? What happened? Why were those flags ignored, given what we know now?
All right. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Kim. These are both ongoing stories we will deal with many times in the coming weeks and months. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, so please check with us tomorrow when we're back. Thanks for listening.